The next one is Totality in Essence by Vimala Thakar.
Yeah.
And again, tell me about this.
Now, Vimala Thakar, she is very much about social change.
Yes, that's what I loved about her. She's gutsy, this woman, really.
And she wanted from early on, basically wanted to be a rake. And she grew up in India. She was not allowed to go the knowledgeable path, only the bhakti as a woman, the heart. And she had fuck it, I just do what I need to do. And really, she has so much clarity.
Yes.
And when I started reading her books, I just really was touched mostly by her femininity and her utter sharp knife.
Yes.
Masculinity, kind of balanced. And also, when you read her books, she talks about the teacher or the speaker. She never talks about herself. She only talks about the teacher. And mostly when people would talk that way or write that way, I think, gee, do normal. But with her, I never had it as like, I get it.
Yes.
The speaker, it's totally not personal or whatever, but and I'm very touched by her perseverance.
Yes.
And that's what I'm touched with all of them, and that's what's in me, obviously, because that's being mirrored.
Yeah.
And she also, they all were standing alone so much, each in their own tradition. And she was influenced by Krishnamurti and asked to teach.
Yes.
Yeah. And I wanted to go and visit her, but then she just passed away.
Yeah.
And I actually did it. But I can feel through her words and her bringing her abiding in the world, in social change. Very powerful.
There is something that I want to share with you that I found that I'm going to read. Again, about combining spirituality and social action, which she was absolutely... I mean, I've only read one book, but clearly she's extraordinary. Sadly, she's dead now, but anyway, she wrote, in this era, to become a spiritual inquirer without social consciousness is a luxury that we can ill afford. And to be a social activist without a scientific understanding of the inner workings of the mind is the worst folly. Neither approach in isolation has had any significant success. There is no question now that an inquirer will have to make an effort to be socially conscious, or that an activist will have to be persuaded of the moral crisis in the human psyche, the significance of being attentive to the inner life. The challenge awaiting us is to go much deeper as human beings, to abandon superficial prejudices and preferences, to expand understanding to a global scale, integrating the totality of living, and to become aware of the wholeness of which we are a manifestation. Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah,
I just thought, gosh.
Says it all, really.
It says it all,
Yeah.
especially now, even, I mean, anyway. Totality in Essence by Vimala Thakar.
Life is a complex phenomenon. I would like to go into the issue of this complexity this morning, as it seems that you would prefer to have a talk. Man is born in the midst of duality. Duality that seems to have two poles having an opposition or a contradiction between them. We are born in the midst of life where there is birth and death. To be born and to die. The event of birth gives an impression that a form with a shape, with a color, with some contents has come into existence, and the event of death gives an impression that something is being destroyed. And in the midst of the events of birth and death, which no one can avoid, man has to live. He has to live in the midst of pleasure and pain that seem to be exclusive of each other, opposed to one another, contradictory to one another. Pleasure being an agreeable sensation and pain being a disagreeable one. You can't avoid either of these. We have got the physical structure with the sense organs, the inner senses, and whenever the sense organs or the senses receive an impression, it is registered as either agreeable or disagreeable. So you can't avoid pleasure, you can't avoid pain if you want to live. And in the midst of these contradictory things, there seems to be a tension between the pleasure and pain. There seems to be a tension between birth and death, and man has the responsibility to live in the midst of that. Joy and sorrow. He has to live in the midst of sound and silence. And you can't escape either the sound or the silence. We have to live in the midst of light and darkness, light and shadow, the day and the night. And the day with the glorious light, and the night with the deep darkness around it, seem to be exclusive of each other. It is not necessary to elaborate upon this point, but if you look at human life, you will see the panorama of these apparently contradictory, apparently mutually exclusive points, having a tension between them. And it is the responsibility of man to live in this duality without getting stuck up either in pain or pleasure, without getting attached either to birth or death, to the day or the night, to the light or the darkness. He has to live in the so-called waking consciousness during the day, and during the night he enters the sleep consciousness, the dream consciousness, the sleep consciousness, and both are necessary and both are inevitable. You can't avoid. And it seems to me that man gets stuck up either in pain or in pleasure. Either he hunts pleasure, and his whole life and living becomes a game of hunting pleasure, pleasurable situations, individuals that would give the pleasure. Or he becomes obsessed with the idea of pain, and his whole life becomes a game of finding out situations, places where he will have no pain. Either he hunts pleasure, or obsessed with the idea of pain, he becomes busy trying to avoid pain. That doesn't happen anyway. Pleasure and pain go together. one as the shadow of the other. Joy and sorrow accompany each other. Birth and death cannot be isolated. Birth is the beginning of death, and death is the beginning of a new birth. The day is the beginning of the evening and the darkness of the night is the indication of a new dawn coming towards you. So to live is to be aware of both ends of the duality, not to ignore either of these. To be aware that there is this duality, that you are born in the midst of duality, and you have to walk through the corridors of duality in each field. He has to move through relationships where he has to act, where he has to respond, and he has to live with the relaxation. Relationship and relaxation. If he ignores either of these, if he does not get acquainted with either of these, or if he gets stuck up in either of these, then he misses the beauty of living. Or if he creates a philosophy out of pleasure or out of pain and tries to find out a direction where he will find only pleasure, no pain, only joy and no sorrow, only the waking consciousness and no sleep, or only sleep and no waking consciousness, then he is going astray. To live is to be vulnerable to the tension between these two poles of duality, and yet to move through that in a simple, innocent, relaxed way. That is really the crux of the whole issue. To be religious is to be able to move through the duality in a non-dual approach. And a non-dual approach for me implies the awareness of the two. As soon as you are aware of the two, you do not get bogged down in any one of them. So the non-dual approach, the non-dual attitude, or the perception born of non-duality implies the content of this non-duality is the awareness of the two poles of duality, their nature, and the inevitability of their existence. Another duality comes to my mind, knowledge and innocency. You can't escape knowledge because you are born with it, you have inherited it. But if you do not get acquainted with innocency, that is freedom from knowledge and the known, then the very burden of knowledge crushes you down. If you do not get acquainted with relaxation, the dimension of total abandonment, then relationships, instead of being opportunities for expressing your own being, become such a great burden that the mind begins to grumble under the burden of relationships. So this morning, as we shall be parting from one another tomorrow, I would like to share with you this very fundamental issue. Meditation is a way of living where you are aware of this duality. You are not afraid of the tension between the duality. It's a way of living in which you move into relationships with relaxation, where you move into sound and speech with the substance of silence with you, where you wake up in the morning with the freshness of profound sleep and where you enter the profound sleep with the humility and innocence of a child sleeping in the lap of his mother. So meditation is a new way of living. It's a new state of being. And let us look at this and let us find out how one sets about it. The perspective of total life goes a very far way to determine the quality of your inner being and determine the quality, the texture, the caliber of your relationship with other people. So am I aware that I have to live between the 2 points of birth and death? Does the word death frighten me? Am I attached to the event of birth as if it is something auspicious? And have I been conditioned to look at death as something inauspicious? Something to weep over? To shed tears? I hope you will see that the word death does not imply the killing that man indulges in, where one human being kills another human being in the name of religion, in the name of ideology, in the name of a country, in the name of a race, under any name. But where man indulges in killing the other, it's not death, it is a murder. It may result in the fact of death, but it is not, it hasn't got the beauty and the grandeur of natural death. I was 12 years old when I saw my grandfather die. He was a religious man, and 6 months before he died, he wrote letters to all his relatives that on such and such a day he will be departing, that has been ordained. He has to depart from the world. Would they come to share the festivity of departure? He was a prince in one of the states in central India. So all his daughters and son-in-laws and sons and daughter-in-laws and cousins, you know the Indian family, and being a prince, all his friends, about 500 people went there. And there was a big feast. I'm not going into the details, just one incident that introduced me to the beauty and grandeur of death. So there was a big feast, and he was serving all people, standing there with folded hands, receiving everyone, joyous like anything, no sickness, nothing. And he gave presents to all the 501 persons. And then he said, "May I take your leave?" And he went to his room where he used to sit down for meditations, sitting cross-legged like this. And he departed with a smile on his lips. Of course, the grandmother and others really did not believe. They thought it was a whim of an old man. So they were humoring him. After half an hour, my father and maternal uncle, they entered the room, tried to find out, but he was gone. They invited the doctors. They thought he might be in samadhi, so let us wait for an hour or two. But nothing, he had just departed. So when I entered the room and looked at that figure, I said, can death be that beautiful? Is this the way to die? As a leaf drops from the tree, the dry leaf dropping away through the air to the earth, have you seen it? In the autumn, how the leaves take leave of the tree, the branches, the trunk. Death is as beautiful as birth. It has its own divinity and ecstasy. If one can enter into it, not succumbing to it out of fear, shrinking, trying to cling to life, resenting the fact of death, then it becomes ugly. So am I aware that everything that is born, everything that has a form, has to go through the event of death? This awareness will bring new passion, new depth to the event of living, because you don't know when you are going to die. There are certain things beyond the logic and mathematics of man, and that's why life is worth living. Love, for example, incalculable, unpredictable. The moment that it will dawn upon your heart and transform your whole being, you cannot mathematically work it out. Death, beauty, you do not know where and how you will come upon beauty. So, the awareness of the fact of death, not somewhere there out far away from me, but here with me, as I inhale and exhale breath. Birth and death is the inhaling and exhaling of life, because it is included in the whole complexity of life. So not knowing when one is going to die, one is very alert and on one's toes, very attentive to live the day or the moment that he has before him and with him. Then postponement of anything becomes simply impossible. You don't have to take a vow that I shall not postpone. It is the awareness of death that brings about an alertness and sensitivity, and you live or you go through what is to be done this moment, you go through it this moment, not out of an compulsion, not out of a vow, a discipline that is intellectually imposed upon you, but the awareness gives a new dynamism to your life. Either you say, one day man has to die, so we don't know when one is going to die, then why not live anyway, anyhow? Why should there be an order, a beauty, an efficiency, an aesthetical keenness? Why not live anyway? That is one approach. That takes away all the charm and grace and grandeur of this opportunity of living. To live is an ecstasy. Or one can say that because I do not know when I am going to be confronted with death, why don't I make the most of what I have? Why don't I make the best of this moment? Because what you call the now, the here, the this moment is the only eternity that you can meet. You cannot meet eternity in future, because future is only in the human mind, not in reality. The division of life into past, present and future is the creation of human mind, and it may be very convenient for arranging collective relationships. But out of human mind there is no reality. Tomorrows or futures or yesterdays have no factual reality. What has factual reality is the isness of life, this moment, here and now. Even the word here, now, present moment are very defective, because the here has no meaning unless you presuppose the there. The this moment becomes meaningless unless you postulate the other moment. The today, the now, all these are relative words. You know, human languages are relative. So these words are not really satisfactory words, but one has to use them for a verbal communication. So the awareness of death brings new vitality and a sense of urgency in living. I have this day, the now, the moment, the circumstances before me, and I have to live with them. Either I live it or I miss it. There is no third alternative. Either you live it or you miss it. And because death is inevitable, one doesn't become sadistic, doesn't want to pursue pain or want to bring the death nearer. There are people trying to use death as an escape. Goodness me. As an escape from the responsibility of living. But once you know that both these two are inevitable facts, and if you recognize that life doesn't begin with the birth and doesn't end with the death, it's much bigger whole. But man is born between these 2 points. As he is born between time and space, he is born between these 2 points of birth and death. He has to live a kind of framework that is there. Being aware of the timelessness, he has to live in the midst of the calculated psychological time, because he is living with human beings. And he has to converse with them. He has to have relationships with them. So on the canvas of eternity, you have the paintings of time and space. But if you are not aware of the timelessness of life, if you are not aware that time is a symbol created by man for the convenience of collective life, then you will become a prisoner of the concept of time. Then you will worry so much about the tomorrow, the future, the next moment, that you will never open your eyes and look at this moment, because you are concerned with the next. You meet a person and you are concerned with how to meet this person in such a way that he is pleased with me, and the relationship of friendship or recognition or appreciation will continue. So you are busy and concerned with the continuity part of relationship rather than the fact of this moment. So you try to project an image before that person that will please him. There comes another person of a different temperament, and then you are busy projecting another image to him or her so that that person is pleased. You are trying to convert relationships into investment for the future, so you don't live them at this moment. So if one is not aware of the timelessness, then he becomes a prisoner of the concept and idea of time. And he either worries about the future or he is brooding about the past. And the factual reality slips out of his grip. So one has to use time, being aware of the timelessness. I hope you see that how there can be an approach where the apparent contradiction or the apparent mutual exclusiveness melts away into the 2 poles of duality becoming complementary to one another, complementary to each other. Birth and death becoming parts, intrinsic parts of one whole life, complementary to each other. Time and timelessness being complementary to each other. The appearance of contradiction and opposition withers away. The appearance of tension withers away when you look at these poles of duality, these 2 points of duality, and get acquainted with them, discover their nature. To live is to be related, we had seen the other day. To be related with the nature, with the animals, with the birds, with the human beings, with the things that you use, with the houses that you build, the cars that you use, the machines that you use. It's a relationship. And no one can escape relationships because in isolation there is only existence, not life. Life vibrates in and through relationships, as peace can live and vibrate only in movements. If there are no movements, there will be dead peace. Peace, for living and operating, requires the field of movement. Relaxation requires the field of relationships to move and operate. Life requires the field of relationship to express itself. When I talk with another person, when I live with other people and react or respond to their behavior, when their behavior affects me, then only I know what I am, what kind of mind I have, what kind of feelings, sentiments, lusts or desires or anger or violence I have. You cannot hide it in relationship. Relationships are the mirror. You may believe yourself to be a very holy person, a very pure person, a very peaceful person, and you move into relationships, either at house or in the office or with friends, and the slightest thing that does not please you, and there you are disturbed, perturbed, peace is shattered. You look upon yourself as a very loving, kind person, and then in relationships something happens and anger bursts out through the eyes, through a glance, through a gesture, through a word. Relationships reflect your inner being, because you have to be there in a relationship. You have to react, you have to respond. Now, to live is to be related. To be related is to move with the things and beings around me without losing my inner equipoise, peace, sanity. That is the challenge of relationship. And I would like to go into this issue a little bit more. Why do relationships disturb us? Why do relationships become a problem? They are a challenge, but a challenge is not a problem. Challenges are like the ripples on the waters. Relationships bring up challenge. If I do not learn how to move into relationships, then I will divide life into a period of relationship and a period of solitude, a period of relationship and a period of retreat. Say, I am tired of being with the people, so let me go now to a retreat. Let me withdraw. We divide life then, fragment, separate it. But if I learn to move through relationships without losing my inner relaxation, without losing my inner sense of freedom and equipoise, then obviously relationships would not tire me. In the midst of relationships, I will be relaxing. Relationship will become a movement of relaxation. This can happen if I can be with people without converting them into my means of security. when I get attached to you, then I'm converting you as a security. I feel that I need security, so I want to depend upon you. I expect things from you. I expect agreement from you, recognition from you. There is no relaxation in a relationship when I get attached. There will be no relaxation in a relationship if I want to dominate over you and try to make out of you a carbon copy of myself. This may sound simple, but this is a very fundamental and serious issue. That in relationship, we want to own and to possess the other people. Not only the husband, the wife, or the boyfriend, or the girlfriend, we want to own and possess even friends. To own them, to possess them as you own a car, as you own a house, or a tape recorder, so that you can play the tape recorder or drive a car whenever you get into a mood of doing that. Whenever you get bored, you go to the tape recorder, play it. Or you feel bored and you get into a car and just go out for a drive. In the same way, we want to utilize the human beings, to own them, to possess them, to feel satisfied that you have them. Secondly, to escape into those human beings whenever you feel bored with life. And thirdly, to dominate over them so that the ego, the self, the me gets gratified. These are the things that spoil, pollute, or contaminate the relationships. Otherwise, relationships are not a bondage at all. Whether it is the relationship of husband, wife, children, parents, or it's a relationship of friends, colleagues, working in an office, business. It is we who create the bondage out of the relationships. There is no life without a relationship. But when I move into it, I say, now, this is a nice person. I wonder if I can have him or her as a friend. This is a nice person. I would like to, there seems to be some similarity between us. Now if we marry or if we live together, then he or she belongs to me. And I belong to him. So the attachment begins. Not love, but attachment for the sake of security. And attachment makes you very suspicious. If the other person is talking to someone, then you begin to suspect. Has he more affection for her? Has she more concern for him? Is he turning away from me? Attachment makes you very suspicious because you want to keep the person to whom you are attached bound to yourself. With the chains of attachment, you want to keep the person, bind him to you. As you keep the things under a lock, you want to keep the person under the lock of a relationship and feel secure. Attachment, then the fear that you may lose the person, then fear making you suspicious, suspicion bringing in jealousy, jealousy bringing in anger. The chain reaction is there. Can I move into relationships without being attached, without expecting attachment from the other person? That is really the challenge. The crisis in human relationships is the lack of love that keeps both the individuals in a relationship free. The crisis in the total human life today is the crisis in psyche, where a person wants freedom for himself, but by being attached to the other, he wants to keep the other person under his thumb, under his domination, denying the freedom to the other, expecting every freedom for oneself, expecting every protection for oneself, denying that protection to the other. And this goes on in family or outside family, in an individual's life and in the life of society. So relationships by themselves are not the bondage, but we create bondage out of them. And then, having lived a life of lust, of attachment, of domination, jealousy, suspicion, we say, oh, these are worldly relationships. Now let me go and find out an ashram, a guru, and those disciples who will be my guru bhais and guru bhaginis or what, guru bands. So I will create a new atmosphere, a new circle of relationship which will be unworldly, non-worldly. If I am attached to the father, to the husband, to the mother, to the wife, to the sister, it's a worldly relationship. And if you get attached to a guru, a master, a teacher, that's a spiritual attachment. You see the silliness of it. You create then, leaving the home, giving up the house and so-called property and everything, one moves and creates a field of new relationships where the same game of attachment, suspicion, jealousy, domination begins. Mind you, a friend who is talking to you is born and brought up in a country which is cluttered with so-called spiritual ashrams. You can't visit a town, a city or a village without such so-called ashrams, where the monks or the sannyasis or the yogis are as ambitious as any worldly man. They have their competitions, they have their jealousies, they have their fights, and the means that they use for those fights are as foul as the means of the politicians, whether they profess Vedanta or this yoga or that yoga. And these are not words spoken out of criticism for anyone. I have gone round the whole of India 3 times. There is not a district out of the 316 districts of India that I have not visited. Not that I would have done it, but I was working in a movement where it was necessary for me to travel. So 3 times I have gone round the whole of India, the land of religions, visited the ashrams, gone up to the Himalayas, up to the height of 16,000 feet I have climbed. The search began at the age of 5, you know. So whatever I am talking, please don't think that I am trying to criticize anyone. These are words written in the ink of blood. There may be exceptions are everywhere. I am talking about giving up one form of relationship, running away from one field of relationship, and creating another field of attachment, jealousy, suspicion. That is what happens. So by giving it a name of a religious or a spiritual relationship, the essence of attachment or jealousy or suspicion, that doesn't change. The I and the me trying to capture what is mine, the attitude of ownership towards the relationship doesn't change. Then we can fight over whether my teacher is superior or your teacher is superior, my God or your God. The organized religions have done it on a very large scale. Individuals do it on a small scale. And the field of relationships has become a field of misery and suffering unnecessarily, unwarrantedly. In isolation there is no life. So we have to discover the secret of getting related with other people while one can live in freedom and let the other person live in freedom. The mystery of relationship has to be uncovered. The secret of relationship is to be uncovered, and we shall go into it this morning, and I hope you will have patience and keep pace with me. If I can move into a relationship of any kind whatsoever, if I can move into it in the simplicity of my being, without trying to project an image upon the other person, then the relationship does not become a problem. I am what I am. Let me get acquainted with myself and then talk to other people, live with them as I am. You know what it implies? Not to compare oneself with other people. A non-comparative approach is always a non-ambitious approach. But if I look at myself and I say, well, I am ugly and the other person is beautiful, then I create a hurt, a wound in my mind. Maybe on the conscious level, maybe on the subconscious level. I say I am ugly and the other person is beautiful, handsome. I am brown and the other person is fair. I am short and the other is tall. I am dull and the other is brilliant. If my perception of other human beings is polluted by this comparative approach, then I will always compare myself with others. And I would like to pretend that I am as clever as the other person. So I will try to gather ideas, thoughts from books, from talks, from individuals, decorate my brain with it and show it off. Because I would like to show that I am clever, knowing full well that I am stupid, knowing full well that I am not clever. But I would like to profess. And then I make an effort, a struggle for gathering, for collecting, storing it in memory, then the effort to produce it whenever I am with people, show it off. And you can't deceive all people, cheat all people for all the time, so you are afraid. Will he find out that I know only little and I do not know about the other aspect? Will they find it out? Then you are always very tense. Lest people find out the shallowness of knowledge. Lest people find out the pettiness of the mind. So if there is a comparative approach, if you are constantly comparing yourself with other people and trying to become like them, then you as you are have no scope to live, to breathe freely, to breathe without any pressure and burden that you have imposed upon yourself. Then you will not be able to be in the beauty of your being, because you are trying to shrink somewhere to look like someone else. You are trying to blow air into yourself to look like and behave like some other person. All the time you are playing a game of becoming someone else, trying to imitate the other person's experiences, other person's ways of living, other person's styles of living. You go on doing that. Whether the boys, the girls in India try to imitate the styles of the Occidentals, or the Occidental youth, the American, the European, tries to imitate the Indian, the Oriental, just the same. If you try to graft upon yourselves because of a comparison, mind you, not out of understanding. When you understand something, the value of it, and the understanding brings about an inner change in you, that's a different matter. We are talking about a comparative approach, an ambitious approach, trying always to measure oneself according to other people, according to their judgments. That way lies fear in relationships. That way lies all the tension and shyness and embarrassment and hesitation in relationships. You can never sing your song like a bird perched upon a branch of a tree and singing into the vast space of the skies. You'll never sing your note in the vast space of freedom, because you will always be on the defensive. So to grow into a non-comparative approach to life is vitally necessary. To be what I am, not measure myself in the terms of other people. Secondly, when I have expressed myself as I am, and I find that it has displeased the other person, or the person doesn't like, or when I have expressed myself and something has gone wrong, that is the opportunity for me to learn. Something has gone wrong. When you are driving a car and the pressure on the escalator is not enough, the nerves in the feet are not educated enough, so the pressure on the brake, the foot brake or the hand brake or the escalator, that's not sufficient, and you find the car wobbling. You don't say, I can't drive the car, so here I step out of it and I go. Or you have not taken care of the choke pipe, or the hands are not sensitive to handle the steering. This is, one has to investigate, learn it, so that the movement of the body and the mind can be in such a way that it doesn't hurt the other people, doesn't do a damage or harm to the other person. If you can't move into a relationship without doing harm to the other, obviously you have not learned how to be related. That is to say, how to live without friction, causing friction. If the other person is psychologically ill or sick or hypersensitive, and he creates a harm or a hurt out of your simple behavior, you can't help it. But otherwise, a person has to find out a sensitive way of speaking and behaving in his all simplicity. And if his expression, his uncovering of the inner being has done some harm, then that is the moment to learn. But as soon as we find out that something has gone wrong, the first desire is to find out the fault with the other person, throw the responsibility on the other person and feel justified in what one has done. So one goes on the defensive, trying to justify one's mistakes, defends one's mistakes. This is the content of bondage. The temptation to defend your own mistakes that even your own intelligence can point out to you. The moment you try to defend, to justify, to interpret, to protect yourself, then relationships become a problem. What is wrong if I commit a mistake in a relationship? I am learning, I am living, I am growing. There might be a mistake. If you are terribly concerned that you always must do the right things the correct way, and you get very nervous and embarrassed, then there will be a paralysis of movement. You will always hesitate to move. So there should be the humility and the simplicity to say to oneself, maybe there will be a mistake, maybe something goes wrong, doesn't matter, I'll find out, I'll learn. To live is to learn, you know. If you don't learn, you become stale. If you stop learning by the age of 25 or 30 and you feel you know everything about life and you have just to repeat certain patterns of behavior day after day, then the behavior becomes mechanical and the persons become stale. There is no freshness about the person. So, a non-comparative approach, and then the simplicity and the innocence to say to oneself, really, I don't know how to live. I am learning. I don't know how to live. So there might be mistakes, and I learn from the mistakes. One can learn from failures, from successes, from mistakes. So there is no fear when I am willing to learn. When I am willing to be exposed in a relationship as I am, so that I find out the factual reality of myself, I get acquainted with myself, then there is no fear. And thirdly, if I do not want to dominate upon other people through expectations, there are many ways of dominating. One way is asking the people, do this, do not do this, you must do this, you must not do this. That is an overt and obvious and a very gross way of dictating things, dictating terms. The second way is of expecting agreement, acceptance, recognition, and appreciation. All the time one is expecting these things. And the moment you find that the other people do not agree or do not accept or do not appreciate or recognize, you feel hurt. People misunderstand you, misinterpret you, and you feel hurt. People born in different cultures, having different temperaments, having constitutional and psychological idiosyncrasies, they are bound to behave in so many different ways. So if one can act or respond in a relationship without looking for a guarantee, looking for a security of appreciation, recognition, or the security of being interpreted correctly, then the relationships become a problem. You express yourself, you move into a relationship, you do what you can, and there is an end to it. It is up to the other person to respond, to receive, to understand, to misunderstand, to interpret, misinterpret. It is up to the other person. So if one can feel the joy of expressing oneself in a relationship, enjoy doing it. You know, if you can enjoy moving into a relationship for the sake of being in a relationship and expressing yourself, then you express spontaneously, fearlessly, with all the humility, whatever you are, and it is finished for you. If the other person understands, there will be a smile on your lips. And if the other person does not understand, for a split second, the fact that it has not been understood may bring about a breath of sadness. That is the fact and the impact of the fact, being sensitive and alert. But you do not make an issue out of it. You do not make a grudge out of it. You do not nurse that he did not understand, she did this, he misunderstood, he cheated, she deceived. You know, you do not go on creating issues and grudges out of those. You do not nurse the hurt within and thereby carry the wounds, ever running wounds in the heart. And on the other hand, you do not create a grudge against the other person. If you create the grudge against the other person, you meet the other person after half an hour, after 2 days, and you can't look at him. Because the memory of that incident of humiliation or insult or the hurt or the misinterpretation works like a screen. It is not you, but the memory that looks at the other person, and naturally there is no relationship. So it seems to me, the mystery of relationship is having a non-comparative, non-ambitious approach, realizing that a person can't do anything more than expressing what he is, and to have the humility to express that without any hypocrisy, without any pretensions, without trying to hide something that there is and pretend to show things that are not there. You cannot borrow the act of living. You know, the movement of living cannot be borrowed. Knowledge can be bought and borrowed. But like wisdom and understanding, this act of living, you cannot pretend the style, the experience of other person and feel satisfied that you have lived. It has got to be your original act. of spontaneity. So, a non-comparative, non-ambitious approach, simplicity and innocency to face the mistakes if there be any, and the consequences if there be any. To shoulder the responsibility of what is. And my dear friends, we don't like it. In a relationship, you get angry, but you like to feel that you are not an angry person. You are not an angry person. The other person is stupid and he has made you angry. I hope you have noticed this. You say, no, I am not angry by nature, But when those other people, they behave in such a stupid way, they make me angry. But my dear fellow, if there was no anger in you, how could anything on the earth cause it at all? They are not the originators. Those occurrences, those events, those behaviors, those words are only instruments in bringing out what is there. But a person feels very pious, very religious. He says, no, I am not an angry person. I am a very peaceful person. But the circumstances, the situation made me angry. He wants to put the blame upon the other. And nowadays, it's very easy to throw the blame upon other people with the help of theories of psychoanalysis. I won't go into it. But you throw the responsibility upon everyone else in the world and feel, poor me. Then this poor me complex, martyr complex, self-pity always leads to depressive psychosis, melancholia. So to have the robustness, to shoulder the responsibility whenever mistakes take place and say, yes, something went wrong. I wasn't aware, I wasn't alert. To shoulder the responsibility of one's own mistake and the consequences thereof. To have that robustness. Then even the mistakes that you commit make your life glorified. But if you are afraid of committing mistakes, then you hesitate from living, shrink away from the act of living. Well, can't go into more details, but when you thus move in daily relationships, then a non-comparative, simple, humble approach keeps you relaxed. Then there is no dichotomy between relationship here and the relaxation there. You move into relationships and through relationships in a relaxed way. With all the relaxation, you move. Spontaneity is relaxation. The content of relaxation is humility, innocency, and spontaneity. So there is no dichotomy between the two. There is no opposition or contradiction between the two. And let me take one more point before we conclude the session. It is the same with speech and silence. Silence is a dimension of life as speech is. As sound is dimension of life, silence also is a dimension. Out of silence, sound is born. Out of the emptiness of space, movement is born. We are always with the word, with the sound, chattering with others or with ourselves. And we never spend time in the dimension of silence. So the words in our mouth are worn out. They are hollow, shallow. They lose the vitality to have any effect upon the heart of the person to whom you speak, because the words are not nourished on the nutrition of silence. The speech has only one nutrition, and that is silence. It is not a negative something. It is not the rigidity of saying I won't speak and take a vow of silence. Not that, but just to gather all the words, the speech unto yourself, winding them up. You spend some time where there is no word, no activity, but only the isness of life. With the silence, let me connect profound sleep. We are covering some points of duality, at least some points. We work in the day and we go to sleep in the night. In the sleep, there may be either the dream consciousness or profound sleep. Now, in profound sleep, the body is totally relaxed, unconditionally relaxed. Every limb, every fiber, nerve, tendon, neuron, all are relaxed. And the mind is relaxed. In profound sleep, you are not the man or the woman, the Indian, the Swedish, the Norwegian, the Hindu, the Catholic. In profound sleep, the maleness, the femaleness, the whole identification goes into abeyance. All your identifications go into abeyance in the phenomenon of profound sleep. The breathing continues, the blood circulation continues, the involuntary activities continue. But they are not from the center of the I, the me, the ego. You don't know what happens in profound sleep, but when you wake up, you find yourself refreshed, rejuvenated. It is a different energy, unconditioned energy, non-personal energy that operates in profound sleep. Not the energy of the me, the I, the energy of the thought or the emotion, but it's an entirely different energy, which is neither personal or collective, individual or collective. And without profound sleep, you can't work in the day. If you don't get profound sleep, you consult a doctor and you take medicines for it. Because without profound sleep, the sanity, the order, the health cannot be sustained, cannot be retained. So as in profound sleep, though you do not know what is happening, and you are not doing anything at all, you are in the state of non-doing, you are in the state of non-action in profound sleep, but the growth takes place. The transformation, the change takes place. It is a field of happening. In waking hours is the field of doing. You do, you act, you move. There is a field of happening. There is this duality of doing and happening. If you say, I am going to remain awake to find out what happens in profound sleep, then there is no sleep. In profound sleep, it is not you who do something or you who act, but you are in a state of total vulnerability for the happening of growth to take place. Profound sleep is a state of total vulnerability. In the same way, when you you plunge into the waters of silence, once you are there, then you are in the field of happening, not doing. What shall I do when I sit silently? Don't sit silently if you want to do something. Silence is an area where you are totally, wholly vulnerable to the life and the life forces that surround you, that are within you and that are around you. You are vulnerable to them. You are vulnerable to the happenings, vulnerable to the movement of the unconditioned uninherited, non-personal energy, which is beyond your control. You may call it intelligence, you may call it sensitivity, but it is an energy which you do not inherit, which is the very nature of motion, life. So in silence, a person is in the realm of happening. But the ego is so rigid, the me, the self, the ego, used to acting, reacting, doing, rejecting, having, not having, all this business throughout the waking hours, it doesn't want to leave. He says, I would like to experience what happens in silence. So it wants to stick to the center. And as long as there is a center, there will be a circumference. If you take a piece of paper and put a point upon it, you have already created an invisible circumference around that point. So when you stick to the point of the ego, the self, the me, the circumference of your knowledge and inheritance is already there, and the whole thing moves. You are back in the trap of the mind. So in silence, when one can be in total abandonment, vulnerability, and it requires humility. If man feels that he is the doer of everything in his life, then he shall never understand what life is, because life is a mystery. There is doing, of course, but there is happening. And as he has to move efficiently and competently in the area of doing with the help of knowledge, the mind, the brain, and the senses, he has to be with full abandonment, openness, vulnerability in the field of happening. When these two are balanced, then there is a harmony in life. Then there is an equipoise in life. A person who doesn't know how to relax in silence is not very good at words. Then or speaking, because he doesn't have the precision, the accuracy, the beauty, the music of sound and speech. His words are born of friction, of tension. They sting. They have an odor of frustration or depression or vanity or pride. To have a pure, chaste word, like a dewdrop of the morning. But if you are introduced to silence, when you are introduced to silence, then silence extends itself into speech, as sleep extends itself into waking hours. So if we remember the fact of sleep, the sleeping hours are as important, if not more, as the waking hours. What happens in profound sleep is as much a part of your total life as what you do. Life is not all doing. More happens to us than we can ever do or we shall ever do to ourselves, because we are organically related to the universal life. But I think I should stop now. It's more than an hour and a quarter. I was trying to share with you the simple fact that man is born in the field of duality. This duality has been looked upon as having a tension. Duality has two poles or 2 points. And man has looked upon these 2 points as mutually exclusive and contradictory to each other. And I question the validity of such a traditional approach. It seems to me that they are neither mutually exclusive nor are they contradictory, but they two together make the whole life. The wholeness of life will be damaged if we have an attitude of callousness or contempt or fear to death. If we have fear of death, we have polluted the whole issue of life and living. because death and birth together make the life. If we are afraid of pain and attached to pleasure, then we have missed the whole beauty of life, because with every pleasure there is pain. And as long as there are senses, you have to go through pleasure and pain. But if in the moment of pleasure you can enter the state of joy and leave the pleasure of thought behind, then you are free from the duality of pleasure and pain. So, we were saying this morning that these 2 points of duality are complementary and supplementary to each other. They together make the whole life. And the awareness of the 2 poles of duality, 2 points of duality, awareness of their nature and how they supplement and complement each other, that gives you a new vitality, a new passion for living. Then one is not obsessed with the tomorrow, or one does not get bogged down in yesterdays. One is not bogged down in the past and not carried away by the future, but then one can remain with the expression of eternity, which is the present moment here and now. The moment before you is condensed eternity. If you can uncover that moment and meet it there and live there, the situation, the challenge, the relationship that is here and now, if you can live it, you have lived. If you say, no, this is a difficult situation, let me postpone. If you go on postponing living to tomorrows, the tomorrow never comes. So the awareness of the duality is the content of non-duality. Non-duality is not something separate, that here it is duality and there it is non-duality. Awareness of duality itself is the content of non-duality. As the awareness of the known, the limitations, the frontiers of the known, awareness of the mechanistic nature of the movement of the known is already being with the unknown. There are not 2 categories, that here it is the known and then you leave and give it up and go somewhere else to the unknown. It is the piercing through the known that brings out the quality of unknown. It is living through the time, being aware of the intrinsic limitations that time is a concept. Living in time, being aware of the conceptual reality of time and factual reality of timelessness, frees you from fear. So life is one indivisible whole. It's a very complex one. And if we do not look at the complexity, investigate the nature of complexity, then we find that everything is complicated. It is not complicated. It is only complex. And we cannot turn back from the complexity of life into the so-called simplicity of primitivity. Understanding of complexity brings us into simplicity. The maturity of understanding is simplicity. As we are meeting in the morning Let us hope that all of us are more fresh, alert, and attentive, perhaps, than yesterday. We shall go together into an issue that is very subtle and very complex. We shall go together into the issue of what brain is, the mind is, and how the mind functions. To go into the anatomy of mind, the whole mechanism. It is going to be difficult because you do not see your own mind. You see your body, the hands, the feet, the eyes. You can touch them. You can look at them if you sit before a mirror. But mind is that part of our body which is invisible and intangible. It is material all the same. Mind is matter. Though it is invisible and intangible, it is a part of the physical body, a very subtle part. It is one of our sense organs. Like the senses that we have, the smelling, the hearing, the seeing, the touching, in the same way, brain is a sense organ, located in the head, connected with the whole body, with sensory and motor nerves. And the most important part of the physical body, if you go into it really. So what you call the mind or the brain is a part of the physical structure. It is a material structure. And one who has not looked at mind as a sense organ, one who has not looked at the brain as a part of the physical structure, does not realize that mind being matter has a kind of energy. In the physical structure you have the glandular energy, you have the muscular energy, you have the nervous or the neurological energy. In the same way, the brain has a kind of energy which we are going to go into this morning. When you talk about the hands, the feet, the optical nerves, the outer ear, the middle ear, the inner ear, it is easy to communicate, to respond to what someone says unto you. But mind being invisible, to talk about the content of that invisible organ, intangible sense organ, gets very difficult. So we will need all our attention this morning. The mind, the brain is located in the human head, connected with the whole body. And as you see with the eyes, and you hear with the ears, with the brain you catch ideas. There is an involuntary activity going on in our body. Whether you want it or not, the eyes see things, You cannot prevent the seeing of the eyes as long as they are open. A living human being sees things around him. He hears the sounds around him. Whether he wants to listen to them or not is different. But the seeing is an involuntary activity of the optical nerves, the retina, receiving impressions. The activity of seeing goes on. The activity of hearing goes on. Not voluntarily, not out of your effort, not out of your motivation, but it is there. You do not breathe consciously with an effort all the time. You are born with a breathing process. The inhaling and the exhaling of breath is something with which you are born. It's one of the involuntary activities. In the same way, the brain, the cerebral organ, has got an involuntary activity of moving and catching ideas, catching thoughts. Registering the name, the color, the kind, the shape, the size of the objects that you touch with your eyes or ears. The brain registers, goes on registering, recording. And whatever has been cognized or registered or recorded gets transferred to memory. This goes on. You do not have to make a conscious effort for it. If there is no physical disability and if there is no psychological inhibition, then this cerebral activity of receiving impression, interpreting them, judging them, transferring them into memory, that goes on in your waking hours. So mind is a sense organ, the brain, a very subtle one. Now this sense organ has been trained and educated by the human race through untold centuries. We were talking yesterday that the content of culture is patterns of behavior, physical behavior and psychological behavior. There are patterns of cooking meals, having meals, the kind of food, the quality of food. There are patterns of going through exercises, patterns of having your clothes, houses, furniture. There are patterns of behavior, talking, shouting, crying, laughing, smiling. When does a person smile? How does he smile? The patterns of reactions and activities. This is the content of culture, conditioning for the physical, the verbal and the mental. And there are beautiful designs in these conditionings. Innumerable variety of designs and patterns. These patterns of behavior and their code words, their symbols, their measurements, their evaluations, priorities are all contained in the brain. As the feet are taught to move on the earth, when a child grows, you teach him how to respond to the law of gravity contained in the earth. So the movement in the feet and the law of gravity in the earth, there is a responsive cooperation between the two, and therefore you can walk, run, climb upon the earth. The child has to be taught how to stand up and cooperate with the earth and how to run, to climb. It falters, it falls down, and the mother, the father, the teacher helps the child to stand up again, to feel the earth. How much pressure to put upon the earth when you walk, the soft earth, the hard earth, the stony surface. All this education has been given. You do not realize it today when you walk because it has become a substance of your being. The child has been educated and trained to discriminate sounds. The noise, the sound, and organized sound, that is music. The child is trained, educated to discriminate the sound of a crow from a swallow, from that of a nightingale, the note of a cuckoo bird. The child gets education in this auditory discrimination, optical discrimination. This is green color, this is blue, this is red, this is yellow, and all the nuances, various shades of colors. This is all part of conditioning. As the ears, the eyes, the nose, they are educated, this so-called mind, the brain, has been trained and educated to receive thought, to interpret it, to evaluate it, to compare it with others, to judge it, and then to put it in memory under different categories. And this process goes on today with an electromagnetic speed. You are not even conscious how such a subtle and complex process is going on every fraction of a second in your and my brain. It goes so quick. The more educated and more cultured you are, the quicker is the process of this cerebration. You see a thing, compare it, evaluate, judge it, reduce it to an idea, put it in your memory. It gets registered as a like, it gets registered as a dislike, as a preference, as a prejudice, as an ideal, as something to be criticized, condemned, to be given up. All these things go on quickly. So the brain involuntarily registers and records the name, the shape, the color, the kind, and the more educated you are, the more refined becomes the process of discrimination, and the faster goes the process of naming, registering, recording. We have to remember this. Now this brain has been nourished on thought. It has been nourished on symbols, ideas. And therefore, we, the human beings living in this 20th century, we live in a world of symbols. When you see an object, you cannot keep the object all the time with you, whether it is a thing or a being. An animal, a bird, a human being, or a thing. You cannot keep that object with you. But the idea about the object, manufactured by the brain, is stored in the bank of memory. So the ideas and symbols are the things that become the content of the brain. As the ear has the auditory power, or the eyes, together with the optical nerves, have the optical powers, the power of the brain consists in the ideas, the thoughts, the symbols, the values, the likes, the dislikes, the prejudices, preferences, all contained in it, systematically fed into the brain by different cultures, different countries, by different contexts of life. So brain functions through the symbol, through the idea, through thought, through an emotion, a feeling, sentiment. These are all the cerebral ways of behavior. As the physical structure outwardly has a way of behavior, sitting down, getting up, moving, there are ways. In the same way, the brain has ways of moving. When it moves into relationship, it has certain ways. As the eyes look at you in a certain way, that is to say, the optical instrument in the action of relationship has ways of behavior. So the brain has ways of behavior. What you call your feelings and sentiments, the angers, the jealousies, the greeds, the violence, that's a cerebral way taught to the human brain through untold centuries by different cultures. religions, metaphysicians, occultists, physical scientists, economic and political leaders, all of these go on feeding systematically into the brain. Thoughts and emotions. So as the feet walk and run, the brain thinks and feels. Mind you, it is connected with the whole body. So as soon as the brain moves, the whole body moves. The brain thinks a thought and the whole neurological system becomes tense. Brain touches an emotion or a feeling and the whole chemical system, the liver, the spleen, the kidney, the pancreas gland, the intestines, they respond to that emotion and a chemical change takes place in the body. So the movement of the brain is interwoven with the whole body. When the brain moves, the body moves. Now, we said the content of the brain is all these symbols, these thoughts, these ideas. And man lives in this ideational, conceptual world much more than the physical world. The more sophisticated, the more cultured a person is, he lives much more in the conceptual world, in the world of ideas, concepts, theories, beliefs, judgments, conclusions. He lives there much more than with his senses. A primitive person who has not dealt much with the cerebration lives more with his senses. And the so-called educated person, intellectually advanced person, lives most of the time in this conceptual world. The concepts, the ideas have their own beauty. The symbols and the world of symbols have their own beauty. But one has to look at the mind, get acquainted with its anatomy, and see how we live in the world of symbols and ideas. We have to see it. For example, all of us talk in terms of time. We measure life by time. A time is a measurement, a yardstick created by man to measure infinity. As he wanted to measure the earth, the space, and he made a kilometer, a mile. That's a measurement. There are no miles and kilometers as far as the globe is concerned. It is the invention of the human mind. When he wanted to make arrangements for collective living, he started measuring. The very idea of measuring is the creation of the human mind. So whether you measure a clock by a yard or a meter, centimeter, whether you measure the earth into kilometers, whether you measure infinity into years and months and days and centuries and hours and minutes, time is a symbol. All the measurements are symbols. You must have noticed this. The numbers with which you measure, like 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 9, which is the perfect number, the whole number, 1 to 9. These are the inventions of human mind. And the relationship between 1 and 2 and 2 and 5 and 5 and 9, all this is arbitrarily arrived at by the ancient man, on which not only mathematics but even astronomy, astrology is based. So man, having this brain, started playing around with it, and he created symbols. We have to look at the symbols and see them for what they are. So I wonder if we look at time and see it as a symbol created by the human mind. Beautiful. You measure it a second and 60 seconds into an hour and 60 seconds into a minute and 60 minutes into an hour and 24 hours into a day. You go on measuring that. But there are no days and hours and minutes and seconds in life. Life is whole. Wherever it moves in its totality. It moves as a whole. Man cannot keep in touch with the movement of totality with his mind, so he fragments it, measures it, and finds out ways of being with a fragment, with the particular. And we have become so used to this language of time, we feel that life is equal to time. We forget that it is a symbol. The yesterday, the today, the tomorrow, these are concepts. The sunset, the sunrise, it's a poetical language. The sun never rises, never does it set. The sun is there. But due to the movement of the earth, the whole globe, in relation to the sun and the whole solar system, the sun, the moon, the planets, when you see the sun, you call it the sunrise, the midday, the evening. The earth in relation to the sun and the movement of the earth. But in reality, there is nothing like sunset or sunrise. So life is timelessness. Time is a creation of the human mind. And one has to see the beauty of this creation so that one can use it efficiently wherever the use is warranted, but does not get obsessed with the idea of time. If the idea of tomorrow obsesses a person, and a person obsessed with the idea of tomorrow, the fear and anxiety of tomorrow, misses the today, then he will never live. Because to live is to be with what is before you, here and now. If the memory of the past keeps you away from this eternity that presents itself to you in what you call the present moment, in what you call the now, in what you call the here, you meet that eternity now at this moment or never. It is eternity cannot be met with in tomorrows. What I am trying to say, my friends, is there are very many symbols. I have taken only one of the time. So time has to be understood as a measurement, as a symbol, beautifully, poetically, aesthetically created and cherished by the human race. I, for one, have nothing against the conditionings of man. The conditionings are not the bondage. To mistake the conditionings for the reality of life leads towards bondage. To see the falsity of the false thing is the beginning of seeing what is true, what is real. So the conditionings are bound to be there. They are part of our inner being. They are the content of consciousness. You cannot run away from them. You cannot deny them. You cannot wish them away. The brain, the mind contains all this. We have touched only one symbol, the symbol of time. And around it is woven the whole structure of psychological time. And collective relationships are arranged, managed on the basis of this. If you say, well, life is timelessness, therefore I don't care for the time, then there will be chaos in collective relationships. In collective relationships and living together, we have to use symbols, as the children use toys and play with them. So that we meet here exactly at 10:30 or 11:15, knowing full well that there is nothing like 11:15 or 12 in life and reality. We meet here at that time. So living together, human transactions, communications require these toys of ideas and symbols. As I said, the mathematical figures, numbers, beautiful things. But if you start counting the totality of life into one or two, the God, the divine into one and two, then you mistake. You are mistaking the symbol for the real. There are the 7 basic notes of music, and you organize them permutation, combination of those notes and their arrangements, you arrive at music. But those 7 basic notes, with which are associated now feelings, sentiments, emotions, if you play Symphony number 2 of Beethoven, you get into one kind of feeling. And if you play Symphony number 5 or Symphony number 9 or Bach or Schubert or Mozart, that communion with that music stimulates certain chemical responses in you, because certain note in relation to certain other has been associated with certain feelings. Or if you travel to the Orient, the ragas, the melodies, the ragas of the morning, before the sunrise, after the sunrise, the mid-morning, the end of the morning, the midday, and so on, for 24 hours. Different ragas, different melodies. These 7 notes, they are the creation, and the music is the creation of human mind. But all these notes and sounds are born of that infinite substance of silence, the soundlessness of life. As time is born of the timelessness of life, and it's only a measure to measure the infinity. The sound is a measurement. Man tried to measure the infinity of silence, and he arrived at sound. He arrived at speech. So the brain contains a great variety of symbols. In art, in sculpture, in music, in literature. You take a point, and with that point you get the whole science of geometry, trigonometry, engineering. You have to postulate and presume that point, having no length and no breadth. If you put a point on paper, it has both length and breadth. But the definition, the presumption of the point is having no length and breadth. You have to presume, and that on that presumption you start. Now the beautiful angles and triangles and circles, octaves, so many things you get out of that. You play with that. The content of culture is this wealth of conditionings, is this wealth of symbols. If a man does not recognize them as symbols, then he becomes a prisoner of the symbols. It is the lack of acquaintance with the conditionings that puts you in bondage. If you see them, look at them in a friendly way and discover what they are and use them in their relative field of utility, they enrich the life. You cannot strip the whole life of all the content of brain, all the content of your psyche. What is it, dear? She wants someone. So the brain, the mind, the consciousness contains all this, and because of this there is a movement going on. The thought energy, the energy of the emotion, the sentiment, the feeling, the energy of anger, energy of lust, of passion, So the mind moves with the energy of all these. The meaning attached to anger, to jealousy, to greed, to lust, to sexual instinct, the meaning attached to all these by man gives the energy. So the mind, the brain, containing all these, is moving involuntarily. There cannot be matter without motion. Wherever there is matter, there is energy. Energy being the property of that matter. And wherever there is energy, energy is never idle, it moves. So the mind is moving. Please do not look upon the incessant movement of mind as a problem. Otherwise, we will create a problem out of a simple fact of life. The mind moves. When you sit down quietly, winding up all your sensual activities, you notice the movement of mind. When you are busy the whole day, physically acting or reacting, then you do not notice the velocity with which the mind moves. But when you sit quietly, the first encounter is with your own mind and its movement. Then you find out in how many directions the mind moves, hops from one point to the other. Now it is with one thought and it hops over to another emotion, and there, after a fraction of a second, it hops over and jumps to another thought. The whole movement of mind. The variety of directions in which the mind tries to run simultaneously. All this you will notice. It is vitally important to look at the mind, to be with it, and to observe the movement of the mind as it goes on, without wanting to change the movement, without wanting to stop it, without wanting to do anything about it, to look at the mind. Because this is only information. As I go on speaking, though I may be speaking about the facts as I have seen them, when you receive it through the brain, it becomes information for you. It will be an information or an idea for you until you experiment with observation. If you just store it in memory, then it will remain there as a piece of information with which you agree or you disagree, which you accept or you reject. It has no value. The brain has already too much information, undigested, incoherent, unrelated to your daily living. And that undigested, unorganized, chaotic information creates mental problems. It keeps the nerves shaking all the time. That chaotic, anarchic, unorganized or disorganized information, undigested. The information remains as an idea as long as you and I do not discover the validity thereof by experimenting. That is why a religious life is a life of constant discovery. Every minute you live, you move, you act, and through the action you discover a nuance of life, some subtle meaning of life, which you had not noticed before. And life being infinite, there is no end to this discovery. That's why it is worth living. If you discover the whole meaning of life by the age of 25, 30, 50, life won't be worth living at all. Life is living, living is learning, learning is growing, discovering. And the authenticity of personal discovery gives the vitality and passion. Information and ideas never give you passion. They can't give you a non-cerebral energy. Knowledge gives you energy born of thought. But discovery and understanding, a personal encounter and understanding, give you a non-cerebral energy about which we shall talk later on. But this morning, let us be busy. Let us investigate how the brain functions. The brain functions involuntarily. And when you add a voluntary effort to it, by providing a motive, a purpose, an intention, then you increase the velocity of that movement. It is such a fascinating subject, this mystery of mind, if you can go into it. So whether you want it or not, the brain moves. It has a momentum of millions of years behind it. The thoughts, the ideas that you and I have are not all our creation. A tiny bit of it may be acquired by you and me since our childhood, but much of it is inherited from the parents, from the family, from the community into which you are born, the culture of the country, the context of the life, and then also the total human race. This tiny little brain of man this mysterious sense organ that you and I have, contain in its chemicals the total human experience and knowledge. And please, this is not a tall claim. This is a simple fact that you and I contain the knowledge and experience of the total humanity, total human race. Knowledge and experience. Because the knowledge and the experience are constantly getting converted into chemicals stored in brain cells. It is possible to extract that knowledge and memory from a brain cell and inject it into another brain. So, in our biological and psychological inheritance, we have got it, the knowledge, the experience, and it has its momentum. You need not give it a momentum. Even without you or in spite of you, it moves. And with the motivations that you acquire in this life, you add to the velocity already existing. Or if you try to resist the movement of the mind, then also you add velocity. Every resistance increases the speed of what is contained inside. The more you try to resist it, the more you try to suppress and repress it, the more it gets motion. The momentum, the speed, the velocity increases with your every resistance. I am not a student of science, so if the expression velocity or momentum or movement, if they are not very apt expressions, please forgive me. It is not easy for me to get apt words in your language, I mean in English language. If it were Sanskrit, then there would be much more accuracy and precision. It's difficult for me even to satisfy myself when I have to communicate in English language. So, the brain moves, the mind moves. The content of the consciousness is all these symbols, ideas and thoughts. The variety of them is not a problem unless you create a problem out of it. It is there. It is the inheritance. Now, how do I see it for myself? You may say, all right, you have talked about it. How do I see it? And how can I get into a direct, simple, immediate encounter with my own brain? That is a very important question. We are not taught to do that. Since childhood we are trained to use the brain. Ideas are fed into it. Patterns of behavior are fed into it. But nobody educates us to look at the mind, its mechanism, its movement, the kind of energy that mind generates, and so on. So as inquirers, we will have to educate ourselves in looking at the movement of mind. What does this imply? Who will look? And what is looking? What is observing? First of all, we use the word I, don't we? You are listening to me and you are aware that you are listening. This is not a simple activity of listening, but you listen, you understand, you agree or you do not agree with it, and at the same time you are aware that you are listening. You like certain things and you are aware that you like it. This human consciousness is a complex consciousness. It can move backward and forward, upward and downward, in all directions simultaneously. inward and outward. So, a person can think and be aware that he is thinking. He can act and be aware that he is acting. If he is sensitive, why he is acting and how he is acting, and so on. So human psyche or consciousness is a very much evolved consciousness, and a very complex one. So, I, the experiencer, I, the doer, sit down to observe or look at my own mind. At present, the energy at the level of the mind or the brain is divided, is it not? You are listening, and at the same time you are aware that you are listening. You are dividing it into two and using it in that duality. Every activity requires the duality. So, I sit down to look at myself. I am using the I, the me, the self, the ego. Where does the ego come from? What is the I consciousness? We shall go into it later on. But it's not a problem for any one of us. We always use the term I, the me, I do it, I experience it, I hate it, I like it. The same I, the same ego is now going to look at itself. As you look at yourself into the mirror. Into the mirror you see a person, but that person is your own reflection. You are looking at yourself. In the same way, you are going to look at yourself, not physically, not at the tangible and physical level, but at the invisible level. And where is the mirror? The mirror is the state of observation. I sit down. Whether I sit down or I stand up or I walk around, it's immaterial. This is only a way of communicating. Otherwise, you might think, oh, it is necessary to sit down. I am not implying that way. But you have to use words. So I say, you sit down. You are not looking at objects. You are not hearing or hearing sounds or listening to them. But you begin to watch the movement of the mind. You notice, you begin to notice, when there is nothing to be done, there is nothing to be acquired and obtained, the outgoing activities are all gathered unto yourself. The looking, the listening, the doing, the reacting, there is no necessity, they are not warranted. So all the senses are gathered unto the I, the me, the self. They are not moving outward. So with all the faculties intact, now you remain and you see the mind moving. Thought is a movement of mind, and emotion is a movement of mind. So when you sit quietly, there comes up a thought, there comes up an idea, there comes up an emotion, not stimulated by external objects, because you are not sitting there in relation to the objects around you. You are sitting in relation to yourself, with yourself. So the ideas, the thoughts, the feelings, and their movement is felt. What happens is, as soon as you feel the movement of the thought or the emotion, you react to it. We have been trained to feel feelings or to think thoughts either stimulated by external objects and immediately react accordingly, or we are educated to react to the thoughts and feelings that come from within. But this business of reacting goes on. We react so quickly, unawares, unknowingly, unconsciously. The reaction goes on of judging it, of evaluating it, of reducing what is seen, what is felt, to a conclusion, to a theory. So when you sit down and you begin to notice the movement of mind, the first pitfall is reacting to what is being observed. You will notice it very quickly when you experiment with this observation. You will notice that one is not educated to remain in the state of pure and simple observation, non-reactional attention. One is not educated to be in that state of bare cognition, pure attention. That state is not sustained. The moment you are there, the reaction comes in, and the state of observation gets contaminated, gets polluted. So when you begin to sit down and watch the movement of mind, the first thing you notice is, I cannot observe. I cannot remain steadily in the state of non-reactional attention. That's a great discovery if one can arrive at that. Not as a theory, but how the human race, advanced in intellectual activity of grasping or acquiring ideas, interpreting, judging, and storing them in memory, has grown lopsidedly. It has lost the simplicity of remaining in the state of simple, innocent observation. Simple, innocent look, a glance. We have lost that elegance of innocency. We are so busy. Something seen, heard, felt, reacted, judged, compared, and put it into like or dislike, good or bad. Like a businessman. To be with something. Just in the simplicity of being, to be with it. So one realizes that one does not know how to observe. An encounter with the movement of mind can teach us a lot. You know, life is a teacher. And with every discovery of the factual reality, you learn something. If one has the humility to learn, the master, the teacher, this whole life is around you and within you, eager to teach you, eager to open you. So I say, goodness me, I don't know how to observe. The moment I observe, the reaction comes up. So how do I learn to observe? One has to learn to observe. That is to say, to sustain the state of simple cognition, the state of non-reactional attention. When you sit in silence, you see that the mind is moving. And you say, well, I was sitting in silence and the mind was moving. There were so many thoughts. Obviously, there were thoughts. But when you went into silence, at least you could notice. Noticing the subtle movement of mind by itself is a great act of learning. So you sit down and watch and observe. The observation slips out of you and you notice the state of inattention. You notice that you are in the state of inattention. You were not attentive. If you get angry with yourself and say, well, I sat down for observing and I can't observe. I sat down for observing and suddenly I lapsed into my reactions. If you try to condemn yourself, criticize yourself, or if you give yourself a timetable that the observation must be learned within 1 minute or 1 year, if you try to imprison the growth into your schedules, your timetables, your ambitions, Your comparisons with other people, the other person learned in 1 minute and I can't do it. If you are comparing, if you are measuring, then the growth cannot take place. Religion is a question of total growth. It's only total growth that transforms the quality of your being, not petty little changes that we bring about intellectually or emotionally. The changes in behavior outward, they do not result in the growth of total being. So when I observe and I notice in that moment of observation that the state of observation is not steady, it is shaky, and a fraction of a second I am there and I am not there, then let me notice that I am not there. Being aware of the inattention is itself a kind of attentiveness. But one has an image of oneself. I am very sensitive, I am very attentive, I am very quick. One has an image of oneself. And when he sits down to observe and discovers that he cannot, then the image is shattered. You know, we all have our own images. So I have an image, I do think quickly. What is there in observation? I sat down, I'll get it very quickly. We feel as if it is something to be grasped, to be grabbed. And you know, life is something that can never be grabbed, never be grasped, never be imprisoned into your framework of experiences, cannot be imprisoned in concepts and ideas. It can enter into an idea, a thought, and go out, like the breathing in and breathing out. You cannot arrest life. You cannot imprison life. So when you sit there and when you notice that you do not know how to observe, if you become impatient, if your image is shattered, if you feel humiliated, if you feel self-pity, I have lived 60 years in life and I don't know how to observe. Goodness me, now what am I going to do? Will I be there in liberation or nirvana before I die or not? You know, all such crazy things come up. And that builds a resistance. So when I notice that I am inattentive, that I was in the state of inattention or non-attention, let me not resist that state of non-attention. Let me not create a problem out of that momentary inattentiveness. Because if I resist it, if I grudge it, if I get annoyed with it, I am complicating the matter. It was very simple that due to a deep-rooted habit of reacting, the state of observation was not sustained. When you learn to drive a car or to pilot an aeroplane, the balance is precarious in the beginning. When you learn to swim, in the same way, every learning and every growth is painful, because one moment you feel you have got it and the other moment it slips. The nerves, the control about the nerves, right from your toe to the crown of your head, it doesn't come quickly. The sensual system, the physical structure, requires time for education, not the understanding. Understanding is not of time, but for the response to come out of your whole being, and for the sensual, the physical, to keep pace with the quickness of your understanding. That requires education. So when you have understood what is observation, and you sit down to observe, not to experience, not to analyze, not to judge, there you sit down. You have understood what is observation. And yet when the observation takes place, it slips. So one has to be very pliable, be in the state of observation, and also go with the state of inattention without resistance, without complicating the state of non-attention any further. Then the moment you become aware that you were not attentive, the attentiveness comes back. The moment you become aware that you were not observing, you were not in the state of observation, that very recognition brings you back to the state of observation. So one has to work upon oneself seriously, and seriousness does not mean stiffness or rigidity. It does not mean dogmatism. It does not mean becoming fanatic about it. Seriousness has its own relaxation. I say seriousness in order to remind ourselves that our impatience, our ambitions cannot affect the growth anyway. It cannot escalate the speed. It is only the intensity of inquiry that can accelerate the speed, nothing else. The heat of that intensity, the depth of the passion, that can bring about the growth quicker, but not the impatience, the annoyance, the irritation, the resistance, the comparison, the self-pity. On the other hand, they create obstructions and they slow down the pace of growth. So I sit down to observe, observation being non-reactional attention, as I am not educated in it, and I started at the age of 15 or 20 or 50, the whole system does not cooperate. So on one hand, through proper diet and exercises and sleep and so on, what we had talked about yesterday, by creating an inner order on the physical structure, I make the physical structure more and more sensitive. I educate it in sensitivity, and that sensitivity cooperates with me when I learn observation. Spiritual life is a realm of self-education at all levels, in all fields, dehypnotizing ourselves that we know what religion is or what spirituality is. So now I think the time is over. So I cannot proceed any further. This morning we went into the issue of mind. Mind is the mind, the brain, including all the faculties of the brain. The faculty of imagination, the faculty of memory, the faculty of retaining ideas in memory, and so on. The brain, the mind, is a sense organ, located in the head, connected with the whole body, interwoven into the body. And before I conclude, may I just remind you that this brain is interwoven very closely and intimately with all the organs contained in the stomach. The pituitary gland connected with the whole of your stomach. The slightest movement in the brain, and the liver, the kidneys, the spleen, the pancreas gland, the intestines, big and small, they get affected with it. Attention is generated in the stomach. If there is something wrong in the stomach, if the digestive process is not functioning properly, it affects the nerves in the brain. It affects the optical nerves, the auditory nerves, the points of pleasure, the point of pain located in the brain. It affects the movement of all the brain cells, the blood circulation in the brain. That is why one pays so much attention to the exercise, to the diet, and to the other parts of the physical life. The navel point and the brain located in the head, these two, unless they are balanced properly, they are in a proper balance. The physical and the mental health is not easy to come by. It is only in the balance of the two that the radiance of health can be there. So we were talking this morning about this beautiful and complex, very sensitive sense organ. It functions through symbols, ideas, thoughts, conclusions, theories. It cannot function without a thought, without an emotion, without an idea, without a word. The brain doesn't function. For the fun of it, you can find out what the movement of the brain implies. Some idea, some thought, some concept, some imagination, some memory, the manipulation of knowledge, manipulation of experiences, and so on. Now, all these are the inheritance that we have, and we have no control over the velocity, the momentum of the inheritance, the biological and the psychological. They have their tremendous momentum. So on the conscious level, on the surface level, you have the knowledge and experience that you acquire in this life, and deeper down, what you call the subconscious or the unconscious is contained the total inheritance. So there are two energies moving. At the conscious level, the energy of your acquired thought and experience, and at the sub or unconscious level. These are not compartments, please. It is difficult for me to indicate through words. The words can give wrong ideas. Its consciousness is one whole. But the surface movement that we are aware of in waking hours has one kind of energy and one kind of motion. That idea, that motion or energy of our theories, our values, is much slower, very much slower than the motion of subconscious or unconscious. Shall I put it this way? The motion of the inheritance is much more than the movement or the momentum of what you acquire since childhood. There are two motions, two different energies working parallel. And unless there is a harmony in these two, there is no peace. We talked about the content of the psyche, the two different momentums contained in the psyche, and we proceeded to find out how we can become aware of them. And in the last point, we saw that for a personal discovery, a direct encounter with the mind is inevitable. A direct encounter with the mind implies being with oneself and observing the movement of the mind as it takes place. Not with an idea, but just as it takes place, to watch it. When we went into this issue, we found out that we don't know how to observe. We don't know how to look. That is why education becomes necessary. Throughout the day, educate the physical being to be more sensitive, and when you spend some time with yourself to observe, not to be impatient or not to be in a hurry, but to observe. And when you lapse into inobservation or inattention, to go with that inattention, to go with that non-observation. And the moment you recognize it, the moment you become aware of it, you are back in the state of observation. Up till this, we have come today. The rest of this issue we shall take tomorrow. If some of you find it difficult, I'm really helpless, because I don't think I could put it in simpler words, or that I could make it more easy. This consciousness is a very difficult thing to deal with through words. So we have had enough for the morning, haven't we? As this has been rather a stiff subject. Shall we end it with some recital of a mantra? I will recite today a mantra from second Veda, Yajurveda, and it means, wake up, O my mind, wake up to the infinite divinity that surrounds you. Those who are aware of that infinite life receive help from that infinity, but those who are in the deep slumber of intellect, infinity waits upon them that they also might wake up someday. Wake up, O my mind, wake up to the vast infinite life vibrating within you and around you. That's a kind of free translation. Yajagreto duram udaite daivam tadu suktasya tathai vaidi Dhuram gamam jyotisham jyotirekam tam me manah tam me manah tam me manah Shiva sankalpamastu Shiva sankalpamastu Shiva sankalpamastu Yajagreto duram udaiti daivam tadu suktasya tathaivaiti duram gamam jyotisham jyotirekam tanme manah Shiva sankalpamastu Shiva sankalpamastu Shiva sankalpamastu Hari Om Hari Hari Om Hari Om Hari Om Hari Om Hari Om